Right. Looks like we've got folks in here now. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining. We're going to get started in just a minute or two. We want to leave some time for folks who are joining just here at the top of the hour. This is going to be a fast, focused session, about 45 minutes of content and conversation, then live Q&A at the end. So while folks are coming in, feel free to drop into the chat. Tell us where you're joining from. We always love to hear where everybody's located and how far-flung people are. It's just a good mix to see what the geographies are. Location and company or role is also helpful for us to understand context. It's just useful for us to see who's here with us. So yeah, if you just give us another moment or two, we'll let the last few folks here kind of trickle in and then we'll get started. All right. And I'm here in Raleigh, by the way. So, or actually Chapel Hill, just outside of Raleigh. Oh, we have someone coming in from India here. Fantastic. New York City, UK. All right. It's a good mix. Of course, folks, and more New York City. Some more TripleLift folks. Fantastic. And in Boston. All right. All right, folks, we're going to just be waiting just one or so more minute and then we'll get started. All right, those numbers are creeping up. That looks good. All right, we've got good attendance. We've got a bunch of people in the house. We've got folks from all over, South Africa, UK, Denver, Brazil. Awesome, fantastic. Well, I appreciate everybody taking the time to join us from all over the world, which I love. But let's go ahead and dive in. Today, we're going to be tackling the intersection of two of the biggest topics in business right now, AI, of course, and sustainability. And how do we innovate responsibly while keeping the climate impacts in check? Let's go ahead and dive in and kick things off. All right, today I'm happy to say that we've got a fantastic panel. We've got three folks here joining me. Nate Barola here, he is the founder of the AI and Environment Resource Hub. Kate Fiala, Director of Business Development at TripleLift, and Maeve Gordon, Senior Director of BD and Partnerships at Sitely. Each of them bring unique lens. Nate from research, Kate from media tech and partnerships, Maeve from client engagement and brand authenticity. Each of our panelists today will be speaking from their personal experiences, just like myself, but they will include anecdotes from their organization from time to time. So we will be grounding these in experiences. I'll be moderating the discussion as Greenplaces VP of Product, where I focus on how technology like AI can be deployed more efficiently and sustainably. So let's go ahead and do a quick icebreaker from the panel. Where are you joining us from today? And can you give us a quick 30-second elevator pitch of what you do? You want to go kick us off, Nate, since you're first here?
Yeah, sure. Pleasure to be here, y'all. Nice to meet you. My name is Nate. I'm an AI and environment researcher currently based in the DC area. I'm the founder of the AI and Environment Resource Hub, just like mentioned on the slide. It's an open source access database that logs resources at the intersection of AI and the environment in different domains from sustainability, which is today's topic, all the way to energy efficiency. So, pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. Thanks for joining us, Nate. Kate?
Hi, everyone. I'm Kate Fiala. I'm calling in from New York. I'm Director of Business Development at TripleLift, which is an advertising technology company developing advanced creative technology in the programmatic space. My focus is on our enterprise partnerships, which includes Greenplaces. And we're lucky enough that our private equity company, Vista, has high sustainable business practice standards for their portfolio companies. So I've been enthusiastic to help TripleLift with our sustainability strategy and learn as much as I can in that space.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kate. Maeve?
Hi guys, Maeve here, also calling in from New York, but from Ireland originally. I'm from Sitely, Senior Director of Biz Dev and Partnerships. We have a platform called Brand Mentality that essentially is a data layer that aligns a brand's identity with cultural moments that matter, which includes sustainability. So we have started internally, operationally on our sustainability journey here too. And yeah, very excited to be here and chat with you all today.
Fantastic. Well, thanks everybody for those intros. Let's go ahead and chat about or jump into what we're going to be doing today on our agenda. We're going to start with a quick overview of Greenplaces and why this topic matters, give you some background there. Then we'll ground ourselves in the reality of an LLM's footprint, which is significant, what training and inference actually costs in terms of energy and water. Next, I'll walk through some best practices for using AI responsibly, drawing from both industry research and work with our clients. And then, most importantly, we'll turn over to the panel for a deeper discussion and your live questions. By the end, our goal is for you to walk away with a clear picture of the challenge and some actionable steps you can take inside your own organization. All right. So before we dive into the content, let's start with a quick poll. I have a question for you. When you use AI tools like ChatGPT, how often do you think about the environmental impact? And here we go, pops up. Feel free to pick whichever one makes sense for you. All right, everybody go ahead and make those choices. I know it can be a tough decision. Though I'm not sure where I get to see the answers. Oh, all right, I'll see when we get the response back on that one. Oh, here we go. It popped up in another place. So it looks like we fall a little bit more heavily into the occasionally, but I'm not sure how big the impact is. And some often it's part of my decision making. That's great because we'll see that some folks, like through us research from Capgemini, we found that only 12% of the executives are measuring their footprint annually. So knowing that folks, more and more people in here are thinking about it as they use it, that's very helpful for us in terms of like getting on the right track to make better decisions. All right. Okay. Now, let's go ahead and give you a quick grounding on who we are at Greenplaces, since everybody may not be familiar with us. Let's go ahead and just do a quick dive in. We actually had a registrant ask us about our vision and purpose, so it felt right to include this slide to give a quick overview of us. So our vision is a world where sustainability is a fundamental part of every business. Our mission is to empower businesses to embrace sustainability with accessible, impactful solutions. And our purpose is to make sustainability realistic, valuable, and scalable, not a barrier, but an advantage. We really exist to help companies take meaningful climate action, meet evolving regulations, and lead with purpose, which is an exciting thing for us to have to do. Now let's pivot into the reality check. What is the environmental footprint of a large language model like ChatGPT or similar kinds? Um, every day, ChatGPT consumes 2.5 million liters of water to power prompts across its user base. That averages about 1 milliliter per prompt. That's tiny for any little prompt, but it's massive when you multiply it by the 2.5 billion daily queries. So while those queries may vary, we see that these are kind of the back of the napkin math to get us here. Now, electricity, at the same time, electricity demand from those data centers is set to more than double by 2030. And this is largely driven by AI and the scale that it requires. With that back of the napkin math, these numbers, while they can vary a bit, the scale of this is undeniable that we're looking at here around 945 terawatt hours of energy and 2.5 million liters of water a day for prompts. That's a lot. So we have to start thinking about like this impact and how is our usage playing a role in that? And this is why efficiency is not just nice to have, it's urgent. So when we think about ChatGPT or other models, we do have to think about both training and inference, and they're very different. If you're not familiar, training a large model like ChatGPT is the process where it looks across all that information in order to build up the model it's going to use for the questions or the prompts. And it can use enough electricity to power 5,000 homes for a year. That's a huge one-time investment. That's really tied to the infrastructure and how these work in terms of hardware and things like that. Now, the inference, the day-to-day use where you're prompting, that adds up. At scale, it can often surpass the costs of training within months. So inference is really where the lifetime energy use piles up, and we want to be thinking about both of these. But for many of us, this will live mostly in the inference camp. Now, as we look at this, there's going to be a lot of things that you can think about in terms of the trade-offs here. Bigger models can handle broader queries, but have oftentimes carrying a higher environmental cost, while smaller models can be much more efficient. And smaller organizations can't always afford to or have the skills to train their own larger models, so they oftentimes have to choose from what's available. And this can create equity issues as well. All right. So if we understanding what we know about these LLMs and how much they use, how can we do our part to try to be more efficient when we dig into them? Really, this isn't just about us trying to reduce our footprint. This is also about us trying to make sure that we're reducing our costs, right? So let's talk about these activities that we can do. First of all, we want to start with model selection. Whenever you're using tools like this, for a lot of one-off things that you might just do in your browser, things like that, it's not as big of a deal. But we do want to think about, do I need the latest and greatest, or can I use something smaller and quicker? When we start to look at using this for within our own products or within repeatable processes, it's very important that we can choose the right model. We don't want to default to the biggest or what we think of as the smartest. We want to make sure that we're testing and that we're using the smallest one that gives us the best results. This will end up being the most cost effective, but also the least impact on the environment. Prompt optimization is next. Really using things like concise chain of thought. So instead of asking for the LLM to think through something, or if it's using research mode, just telling it to use research mode, make sure that you're telling it to be concise when you do that, because that helps it to reduce a lot of extra tokens, saves you money, and saves a lot of processing. We also can do things like caching queries so that you can not have to requery for similar or same results when it's possible. And that also oftentimes can be improved by breaking your queries down as well into multiple smaller prompts. And then lastly, batching workloads and thinking about when you submit those batches. If you can do these in offline hours in the evening, that can be really helpful, right? Run your non-urgent jobs during these lower grid periods. Also think about the grids that they're running in. If you're setting up new workloads and it's all cloud-based, take a look around. A lot of these different cloud providers you can look at for most of these, like Google, they do have some, I think, carbon zero areas where they can run. And so if you select some locations like that, then you obviously have a lot better impact. So be aware of where your systems are running and potentially consider moving around where some jobs run if you can, because that can be very helpful. Make sure that you put governance around usage. So there's something called Jevons paradox, which basically means the more efficient something becomes, the more people tend to use it. And so the issue here is that the availability breeds use and use cases that weren't effective enough before, but now they are. So as the costs go down, it is also likely that usage will continue to increase, and it means we have to be even more aware because smart rules and governance around how we do things will continue to amplify even higher. Now, lastly, measurement is extremely important. As we look at this, thinking about things like token usage, model type, which data center, how often these queries are run, what kind of responses they have, tracking that information as you're building out your systems will be extremely helpful for your future efforts when you're looking for efficiencies, and also in preparing yourself for future reporting that you may have to do on your footprints, because increasingly, we're going to be needing to include all of our AI usage in when we do our scopes 2 and 3. So it's important that we start to track them. An example of this is PhotoRoom cut over 1,000 megatons of CO2 equivalent by optimizing workloads and running inference during green or grid hours. And so ultimately, there's improvements there to what you're offering for your product, potentially also some bragging rights and some competitive advantages, but you're saving money and reducing that impact. All right. So, in terms of a case for this, only 12%, as I said before, of executives today measure Gen AI's footprint, and only 20% factor environmental impact into model choice. But you can't optimize what you don't measure. So those metrics that we were talking about, model version, token count, frequency, cloud region, they all matter. It's important for you to be tracking them and thinking about them. And a good way to think about this is like Boris here from Salesforce. Sorry, I'm not going to try to get that name right. Treat it like fuel efficiency for a new car purchase. So when you're buying a car, you want transparency. You want to look at that sticker on the window. You want to compare it to other cars to understand for the price, what is the efficiency? What am I getting out of it? Let's make sure that we continue to push for those, and where there is data available, that we do leverage it, because there is some out there from people independently doing this stuff, and then some information has been provided. So dig in and make sure you pay attention to that, because it is going to be helpful in your long-term decision making. All right. Now, One reason, as I said before, that AI is going to need to be reported more and more is that this isn't just best practice, it's now becoming the law. So with SB 253 and 261, as we look at this, there's some combined requirements that will get you caught by either of these. So for 253, we've got companies with over 1 billion in revenue doing business in California. Um, and they will be required to report scopes 1 through 3 under SB 253, and that would include AI in there. And then companies with 500 million plus of revenue will need to disclose climate risk under SB 261. Both of these start in 2026, and AI-related emissions would need to be included in both. So, as we've been telling clients, don't wait. Treat AI usage like any other emission sources you'll need to disclose. Start thinking about them, start understanding how you track them and how you can be aware of what they are and put controls in place around them. So looking at, there's a lot of responsibility on you here and there's a lot of work to be done, but at the same time, like this is an opportunity for those of us who are paying attention and doing the right thing. It's not just a checkbox here, right? This is a catalyst for us to change and improve. Transparency that we provide on this it builds trust with our customers, with our investors, with our internal people as well. So understanding what's going on and being clear about what our impact is helpful. Tracking AI emissions will oftentimes reveal inefficiencies that you can address to save you time, money, and impact. And ultimately, this creates a differentiation. Being able to show that we deliver the same output with fewer emissions, that's a competitive edge, and that's something that I think a lot of us want to be able to talk about as well. So I'm happy to be digging in on that for that reason. And then lastly, part of this is you have to make sure that you are strengthening your strategy here, right? This isn't just about compliance. This is about doing a better job with AI. When I've worked with companies in the past doing AI, oftentimes it's, hey, we want to start an AI project. And there's a lot of great ideas about getting AI integrated into something, but really working to integrate it into how you think about your business and thinking about it more maturely is important. So integrate the AI usage data into your climate disclosures, benchmark against peers. We want to understand where we're sitting, looking for lower emissions per output. That can be a good differentiator. Use compliance insights to drive efficiency and cost savings in infrastructure. So these aren't just sustainability wins, they're operational and financial wins too. All right. That was my spiel. Now we get to now that we have that foundation in place, let's hear from the panel. So we'll stop sharing slides. We're in here and we're gonna dive right in. 1 second here. Sorry, I'm gonna get my page up here. So, all right, folks. Happy to be now talking with you. Let's go ahead and there's a good framing question that came in from one of our registrants. They said, I'm just starting to use AI and it's saving me time. What can I do to ensure I'm not sucking energy? So more broadly, when there's a rush to integrate AI everywhere, how should organizations decide when generative AI is truly needed and still resonate with the eco-conscious customers? Kate, would you like to jump in first on this one?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Adam. Yeah, this is a great question to kick us off. So yeah, I'll kind of start broad. There is no real one size fits all to this. There's no silver bullet. And I think AI deployment really needs to be considered before we get to deployment. So any AI usage will inevitably increase energy needs, right? And increasing energy needs leads to more energy that we need on the grid, potentially more higher peaks in the summer and winter. It kind of prevents us from, or it might prolong our reliance on fossil fuels, all those kinds of things. And like Adam mentioned, only 12% of executives are saying that they're currently measuring the carbon footprint of AI, and 20% are considering it in their model choice. So those numbers I think need to go up. We need to be asking ourselves, do we need generative AI for this task before deployment? Can we use traditional AI? Can we use, analytics or even manual processes? Like, what is the result that we're going to get? Is it going to be that much more efficient? Or, what's the actual ROI taking into consideration the energy use? And then on a personal level, we can tell AI to be a little more concise in its responses. We can also use more concise prompts, things like that. So there's some things on an individual level that we can think about. But I think energy savings really starts from fewer, more intentional use cases for generative AI and the most powerful tools that we have.
That's great. Appreciate that answer. Maeve, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, definitely great points from Adam and Kate there as well. I think yeah, the reality is, just so much is changing and we just don't have all the answers here. So it's really just trying to figure out what the balance is. I mean, I personally like to think of it as like a some sort of a hybrid intelligence, just like I feel we should be using personal AI, conceptualizing ideas first, then using AI as a support. So don't let it replace that initial ideation, which not only will save the deterioration of our brains in the long term, but also to actually figure out what is needed. So I think as a team, what that really means to me and like what we kind of do over at Slightly as well is like we don't think of it as AI first. We have AI integrated into every aspect of our platform, but we identify, okay, what actually is the problem first and where could AI potentially help us solve it? So again, back to Kate's point, do we need generative AI? Is it potentially agentic AI? Is it traditional AI? I think specifically in advertising as well, we could look at potentially smaller models like predictive or optimization AI could also be solving. So it's just really understanding what that balance is, and making sure we keep in that human connection element of it as well.
I like that. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, looking at here, yeah, that's really helpful to think about as not just one kind of AI. There's generative, then there's the other kinds as well, and a lot of those can have less of an impact. Nate, what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, just first of all, like we have an all-star panel here today, so it's gonna be a hard act to like follow all that amazing like facts and just like everything that's being deployed right now. I will say that like so I from a research perspective, so I'm a researcher at heart, right? So I've taken a lot of courses, for example, that teach like AI for good, like implementing AI into workflows. And one thing that I did notice on the AI for Good Coursera, I can also drop the link in the course, like in the chat or whatever. There was like this focus on before you even like start mapping out what your workflow is, do you even need AI to begin with? Like that's the overarching question that like I feel a lot of people need to ask, like, the panelists have like pointed out. And to add to that, I will say that if you do need to use AI, whatever form it takes, generative AI, whatever, into your workflow, please consider using like frameworks like to kind of shape what your environmental impact is going to be. So for example, there's a really cool organization called the Green Software Foundation. I'll put the link in the chat again. They came out with a green AI position paper, which also includes a framework that kind of capitalizes on the start to finish with 6 different stages for like a life cycle analysis of using green AI and being more, environmentally friendly in your workflows. Really cool paper. Again, I'll put everything in the chat. That's my thoughts on this. Like, use frameworks if you're going to use AI in your workflows and try to be environmentally conscious, like the panelists have pointed out.
Great. Yeah, definitely a stellar panel today. I'm appreciating these responses. Hearing that we need to be more intentional, we need to think about if we should be using AI for this. Is there just simple software solutions or automation? And be smart about how we implement, be intentional. I like that. So we had another question come in around measurement and transparency. What are the first steps companies should take to measure their AI carbon footprint and use that insight to choose partners who align with their sustainability goals? Maeve, do you have some thoughts on this? You want to start us off this time?
Yeah, sure. I think for me, the first step is really to establish what it actually is that you're measuring, right? Like, not to go back to that stat again, because I feel like I'm going to repeat it again, but that 12% at the moment of people are only measuring for Gen AI. So, there's lots of different ways that you can be measuring. So it's really gathering what data that we do have, defining the scope and prioritizing the reductions, but also prioritizing those ones that are actually within our control. So for a lot of companies, specifically in ad tech as well, a lot of the actual emissions are out of our control. So we have to start with those ones that are in our control. But also, I think a big issue in our industry at the moment as well, like some companies aren't transparent enough in terms of like what they're actually measuring for. So I think that's hugely important because none of us really know, and we're all trying to learn. The only way to really kind of solve this is by working together to figure out where we can reduce. So I think being transparent about it, being honest about what's out of our control, um, and then the types of the types of partners that you need might depend on what stage you're at. Are you trying to measure for Gen AI? Are you trying to just measure your operations first? So I think those are a couple of important steps around the measurement piece of it as well. And then also just remembering that it's not all, obviously measurement is hugely important, but I think we have such a focus on measurement at the moment, and shout out to Greenplaces, our partner as well for that, but also impact and is also hugely important. So while it might be, measurement is always first, just making sure that you kind of have those impact use cases as well layered in with the measurement in parallel to that.
All right, I like that. Get their measurements in place, understand them. That's good. Nate, do you want to follow up some thoughts?
Yeah, I was actually going to say like a similar note. I'll try to be a little different in like my response, but typically like I would argue for like a measurement before management kind of like methodology when you try to like quantify like everything. So there's like four steps that I was just like thinking of, like starting with scoping and transparency. And then step number two is like using standardized tools and applying what I call like activity-based metrics. So like for example, GPU usage, or another common term that gets tossed around in the energy space is like power usage effectiveness, which I'm still learning all these. Like, we need like a glossary of terms for the AI and environment space. Step three is like establishing reporting systems. And then step four goes to the impact area, just like making sure you align your sustainability with like internal company metrics and systems. So also happy to give examples of really cool tools that are being used to to track like all the carbon footprint and all that whatnot stuff later, of course.
Great. That's awesome. And thank you for that. And seeing that, like once you figure out what you're going to measure, you do have to be smart about how you carry all that out. So that makes a lot of sense. And Kate, you want to close us out on this topic?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, those are all great points. I know Adam actually also has a really smart, useful, actionable blog post about measuring AI, so would definitely point everyone in that direction. But I think a big part of this too is demanding transparency from our vendors and from AI vendors, um, and selecting cloud providers with transparent sustainability reporting. I know that Google and Microsoft, I think, do this really well. So comparing those vendors and models for efficiency, obviously before committing, maybe baking sustainability metrics into vendor contracts, things like that, but pushing us, and I think regulation, like as Adam mentioned earlier, some of the regulation happening in California will probably push the industry more and more in this direction. But getting that transparency will be definitely key to measurement.
That's a great point. Yeah. I mean, I think at the end of the day, we need to do a lot to measure what we're doing, but this has been brought up multiple times here in that we ultimately work with a lot of partners. And so we have to continue to all advocate for them to follow that same idea, which is measure yourself and make that applicable data available so your customers can know what their impact is and what you're doing. All right, let's keep rolling here. Some great content. Can you share this one? Can you share some examples of workflow or infrastructure optimizations that meaningfully reduced AI energy usage, and where do you think the industry still has room to improve? As a follow-up, there are some other tools out there that work in different formats, like Notebook LLM. Any thoughts on any of those tools as well in terms of impact on process or climate? Just kind of rotating through. Nate, you want to start this one?
Yeah, for sure. So I will say, like, from the research that I've done, like, over the past year, like, for those of you who aren't like, I spend kind of like hours listening to podcasts, watching documentaries. I'm an AI policy nerd. I love doing that type of stuff in my spare time. The general trend that I've observed with these AI models is kind of like the bigger is better approach. So, like, the more money, compute, and energy that we throw into developing these like large language models, like the more ROI we're going to get. That's not necessarily the case. Like, some people are arguing the exact opposite, where actually you're experiencing a smaller kind of ROI the more like larger these models get. So there's a really cool paper that I read this morning which claimed like the future of like AI, like LLMs, are like smaller agentic based like AI systems that work together in parallel. So it's like smaller specialized systems that don't require as much energy to run and are obviously not as environmentally intensive. That's kind of like what I wanted to say, like on where I see kind of like AI potentially going. That being said, I'm not an AI engineer by any means, just a humble researcher. And another really cool tactic that I've seen being used to kind of like train like AI models. We'll go into a little bit more about this with like training versus inference. But for example, when you're training like an AI model, you can shift your workloads to, for example, low carbon hours or regions. So there was actually a paper on Hugging Face with the Bloom language model that is just like, just think of it as another large language model. Basically, TLDR, they use renewable energy in France predominantly, which runs on nuclear, to train the actual LLM, the Bloom model, which is super cool. And it's completely different, for example, compared to GPT-3, which we still don't know exactly what the energy mix like was for training that particular model, but you could imply a healthy amount is fossil fuel based. So
Yeah, that would make sense. That's great. That's really interesting to hear. And I think that tells us more also about kind of like where are we going with this in general, with these companies building the models and with lots of smaller companies building models, do they have the options? Um, Kate, would you like to jump in and add your commentary?
For sure. Yeah, Nate, those are awesome examples. I'll give a quick example that we've just come across within TripleLift. So we use Zoom AI Companion to help our sales folks take meeting notes more efficiently. And, we've been trying to figure out a way, how should we get those meeting notes within Salesforce? At what cadence do we need to do that? Is it something that needs to be added exactly after every meeting, kind of in real time, or can we aggregate this on a daily basis? And there actually was a business incentive for us to kind of aggregate those jobs because the way that we're paying for the service is on completed jobs. So if we aggregate the meeting notes on a daily basis, upload them at the end of the day. That should reduce the kind of energy intensity and also reduce costs for us. So this is a good example of when like cost and sustainability and energy savings are aligned. So that was something that we were kind of working on recently. But yeah, I think this has been mentioned as well, but prompt optimization, so concise chain of thought, caching repeated queries, batch processing, things like that. Using pre-built models versus custom models, which are usually less energy intensive. So we can think about that. But yeah, I think aggregating tasks is a good one. And I loved what Nathan said about kind of the future of using smaller, more specific models versus, kind of this like frenetic push for the bigger and bigger models. And just how can we use AI? And it's a sexy new term, but like really, how can we get more precise?
That's great. Yeah. And I love that just being more intentional. This has come up before, thinking about it, not just saying, oh, we'll just throw it at AI. It's like, how are we going to throw it? Just like we would with any other problem. It is so new. I think a lot of times people are still just kind of excited to use it and see what it can do. Maeve, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think the crew here covered the majority of the points. I think another short example is that we're testing out some like data hygiene cadence as well. So, on a bi-weekly basis, we're deleting any inactive accounts, just like trying to get rid of any waste, any deduplication, etc. I think that's an important one as well. And I think I did notice there was another question around the notebook. I'll just focus in on that. I don't know if that's been covered as much. So just, I think to answer that question, I guess it really does depend as well on how you're using these models as well. So like there's not a straight up answer for that, but I will say that like they aren't disclosing their emissions publicly at the moment, but there is some sort of, notebook is owned by Google, right? So they are, and they have pledged carbon neutrality by 2030. So that has to mean something, right? In terms of where they're trying to go, whereas obviously things are a bit different with ChatGPT, et cetera. And again, we don't know what GPT-5, what those emissions look like as well. So yeah, I think that's kind of both those answers. I think the rest of the crew had some great stats there. So
Oh, thank you. Yeah. And I think that's interesting when you talk about something like Notebook LM, because this came up also in other places like third-party services, especially newer ones. We may want to jump to leverage them to get ahead, but it can oftentimes lead to a bit of ambiguity in terms of what the outcome is. And then I think, Nate, maybe it was you who mentioned in our prep call that Notebook LM now added a video offering so it can generate a video. And that's really cool, but it means a lot of people are going to use even more Gen AI for something that really probably isn't going to add a ton of value to the podcast thing that it created.
yeah, I mean, I think what just to really like add on really quickly, like what we're seeing obviously like in the AI industry is like a lot of big AI companies are like copying each other to get like a competitive advantage like in the business space. So case in point, for example, also like image generation, right? Like VO3 from Google like created a massive uproar both for good and bad with like video generation capabilities. Like anyone can use this thing. So you'll see like the proliferation of like duplicate features in, things like Notebook LM. And that's both a good and bad thing because that, it drives up the environmental impact. Everyone can generate videos now. It's like just crazy, but yeah.
Yeah, it is crazy. All right. Let's jump over here. We got another question. For companies in California or with major operations there, or really doing business in there in general, how should they start preparing for SB 253 and SB 261 compliance while scaling AI use? I'll go ahead and throw some thoughts into here first. I mean, right now, obviously, there's a lot of political pressure around this whole, around environment. There's a lot of inconsistencies in reporting. There's a lot of companies that need to respond and are a little bit unclear about what they should do. And that's certainly frustrating for everybody. And this extends to other things like CSRD and some of the other regulations. And right now we also have a situation where the federal state directions, especially also with respect to things like AI policy, they're kind of all out of sync. Um, with the publishing of the US AI Action Plan, there is a push to build out as much of that data infrastructure as possible, and that could be really helpful as well. But it's gonna have a lot of environmental and political costs to make it happen. And as we look at California, they oftentimes, as everyone knows, they lead the way with the most kind of pushing the envelope with environmental laws and protections, same with consumer and other areas, right? So there's a big dichotomy here that people have to balance. But we also see other states starting to look at what California has done and starting to mirror it. And I think, what that means for us is what we tell clients is we do need to start preparing, right? If it does look like for a lot of people, you can look at the numbers, you can do some quick work to understand what your sales are, if you have offices in there. Um, it's not helpful here to potentially be too conservative because really what we want to be doing is starting to think about how would I do that? What data would I need, right? Start getting yourself ready and start thinking about if I need to do this, how? Because the reporting will start next year and you're going to need to be ready. So this is something where I do suggest you take some time to think about it. If you need to talk to a trusted expert, we have folks at Greenplaces that can help you work through this as well. But understand how it applies to you because it's important that you start to get that data together so you're not scrambling later. Nate, do you want to add a little commentary from your side on the research perspective?
Yeah, so I will say that I mean you nailed it kind of on the head with like, prepping like prep now is like the advice that like it's like the perfect like action, especially like the policy landscape is like shifting in very interesting like nuances, especially when you like look at what's happening at the federal level, like you pointed out, Adam, like versus like the state level. So I would say like keep an eye like for if you have like policy analyst folks on your team, like tell them to keep like a close eye on like what's happening right now at the federal and also at the state level, depending on where you are. Obviously, if you're in California, you know that like that state leads like every state like in terms of environmental protection laws. So you know that like in some cases you'll have to let's say prepare more if you're based in California compared to let's say for example Texas. But again, don't quote me on that. I will say that it's been very interesting, like tracking like where policy-wise things are going at the federal level. Like Adam, you mentioned the AI like action plan that got released like 3 weeks ago. I think roughly like that was like massive for like data center hyperscalers and companies that are working in the industry. And it's not especially so good for environmental protection like laws specifically, considering they want to speed run NEPA and Clean Air Act permits for data center infrastructure. So best advice I can give: keep an eye on the policy at the state and federal level. Prepare now. That's a great like piece of like advice, and just keep up to date with like the trends. Like it never hurts to like look at the news. Like that's what I do to see like where everything is going at the same time.
Yeah, it's tumultuous times, so unfortunately we do have to keep an eye on the news. At least on the sustainability front. I can understand if you want to shy away from the screens, otherwise it can get crazy out there. All right. We're keeping rolling along here because we've got some more great questions. How can companies build governance structures that balance innovation with responsible AI use? And I know this is a tough one because we got a lot of push and pull over new features and things like that. Nathaniel, or sorry, Nate, do you want to go first?
Yeah, of course. So I love talking about this because like this is where I think like one of the greatest potentials for change in terms of levers are is for governance structures that incorporate environmental AI governance like principles. So this goes back to what I said earlier about like frameworks. Like there are very interesting standards that are now coming out about incorporating like sustainability and environmental AI governance into like let's say corporate, sustainability like tracks and all that good stuff. So frameworks are where I like point people. So again, the GSF like framework is good. There's a couple of like ISO standards that are also like coming out, I think like this year that folks should like keep an eye out for. I will say that in terms of like the mainstream impacts of AI, like again, this is like a very sustainable and like energy focused webinar, which is great. But there are also like other impacts of AI that we don't necessarily think about. So, for example, if your data center runs on fossil fuels, right? God forbid, you're going to have like air quality concerns for the communities nearby. And so, like, I like to term those like unforeseen impacts of like AI. So, like air quality issues, supply chain dynamics for your chips, it like goes beyond. So I encourage my clients to kind of think about it in like a life cycle analysis where you start off with like, let's say, the mining of the rare earth minerals for your data center or your AI chips, and then the disposal, which is like actually a very big concern now. So environmental AI governance principles, and then I'm yapping too much right now. Just a quick shout out to joining various communities of practice, like for example, climate change AI. So many great experts on that free community of practice. GSF is awesome. And then finally, the AI plus Planetary Justice Alliance. I'll put all the links like in the chat. Really cool places to like share research.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. And thank you for those shout outs for those communities. I do think that's a great way for people to stay abreast and also of information and also be able to learn from others that may be in similar situations. Maeve, would you like to follow up? I know that's a tough act to follow.
Yeah, I'll just throw a couple other pointers in. I think they're all, Nathan, great points. I think just overall, operationalizing it and, baking it into what we have is like our OKRs in general. So we have an OKR framework specifically for that, which I think has been huge. And also just understanding and trying to get every aspect of the company and everyone in the company to understand that the purpose and profit don't have to live separately. They don't have to be mutually exclusive. There are a lot of use cases that they can actually live hand in hand. So I think more education around that. And I think also just, before we go ahead and try to provide solutions for some of this externally, just making sure that we have that internally the companies have themselves in order. So making sure that we have ourselves measured, that we're doing enough for the community, that we're measuring ourselves before we go ahead and start measuring anything for clients. I think that that is hugely important. And just acknowledging, yeah, the newness around it and that we're all really like very reliant on each other. Nathan mentioned a couple great communities there, Net Zero. There's a ton of them you can get involved in. So we can all just collaborate on this together. I think as well. And then just, we don't have a dedicated ESG team. We all internally champion this. So I think just finding those internal champions across every single function that we can all be learning from, I think is really, really important as well. So yeah, I think those are kind of the main points, and I can kick it over to Kate as well on that.
Yeah. Kate, you want to finish us out here on this one?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, those are all great points. I'm glad Maeve brought up AdNet Zero. I think we have one or two people from AdNet Zero on the webinar as well. But yeah, it's great to have those types of communities. And I like what Nate said as well about, we think so much about water use and energy use when it comes to AI, but it expands much beyond that to the rare earth minerals and the disposal and things like that. So thinking about the entire life cycle. But yeah, I think multidisciplinary governance teams, getting, as May have said, champions across the organization in every department as we're kind of collaborating on this. I mean, AI touches absolutely everything in our lives and our business, so we need everybody to be thinking about this. Defining clear policies for acceptable use and model selection. Our ROI calculations for generative AI, those should, consider the energy costs and relevant cost factors. And yeah, so I think just making sure that we have stakeholders or invested stakeholders just across the organization to stay on top of it.
That's great. Yeah. So a lot of community, getting involved with others, but also building community internally within your company who cares, who is informed, and help to kind of bring everybody else into the circle. I think that's fantastic. All right, we've got another question here that is kind of looking towards more of the positive, right? So, are there organizations you've seen setting a strong example for sustainable AI use? How do you see AI evolving to drive sustainability in marketing and media? Like, what are the changes there? What do you see coming from maybe some of these folks that are leading the way? What do you think about that? Yeah. Kate, you're still big on my screen. You want to go for it?
Sounds good. Yeah, a few examples here. Well, I want to shout out our partners, Scope 3 in the programmatic space. They help companies measure the carbon footprint associated with digital programmatic media campaigns. So that helps us to enable our clients to be able to optimize based on that, which is great, and has really got that conversation kind of started within the industry. Um, Google is another good example. They have a carbon sense suite for cloud workload efficiency. And then I want to give another example. I was at the NYU Sustainable Business Forum earlier this year. I heard Sami Lakshmanan speak. He's the principal of sustainability at PwC. And mentioned that they've trained their AI models not to answer stupid questions. And I didn't get examples on what those were, but I like the idea that it's really hard to enforce not using AI when you don't need it. Like we've talked a lot about that today. We need to think about when do you need to use generative AI versus not. Like it's kind of a slippery slope. Do I need AI to write an email? No, I've been writing emails my whole life. But am I going to use it every now and then to rephrase something that I'm not sure how to say? Sure. So I liked kind of the idea that something's easily referenceable or Googleable, which I guess is a little bit of a question mark there because Google also embeds AI into their search functionality, so something to think about. But if it's easily referenced, just kind of teaching the models to direct someone elsewhere if it's not worth the time to and energy to respond. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
That is cool. That's smart. I think we're going to see more of that too, right? Kind of a decider, flipping things between lower quality, low effort things and higher effort. And I think that's a great way to think about that. All right, Maeve.
Yeah, I think those are great examples, Kate. I think just kind of more broadly, and then I'll give one or two examples. But I definitely have, yeah, again, I think I've said this before, but I have the most respect for the companies that are kind of the most transparent about the issues around this. Especially around ad tech. And I think also just aligning with people that are authentic about it, and asking ourselves like what companies are doing this because they are mandated to, or what companies are doing it voluntarily. So I think that's a really good kind of thing to keep on your mind as well. And I think a couple of examples, yeah, I think some of the smaller companies, like I came across this company a couple of weeks ago called Prompt Zero. The first AI prompt designed to cut admissions. And I think that was a really, really interesting use case. And I think, as I spoke about before as well, being on the buy side, and like a lot of the data center emissions and the actual like activation is out of our control. I think really aligning again with those data partners that are going in the direction more of renewables. I think Snowflake's another good example of that. That's another example. Some of the holdcos as well. Horizon Media is a good example of culturally they're doing a ton. Um, so yeah, I think those are kind of a couple of examples in the different types of areas, from brands to smaller companies to data centers as well. But there's a lot, and I think as well, there is a lot of interesting things that companies are doing at the moment, that we can learn from. So
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, I think I love hearing all those different examples as well. And I think it's good for us to kind of look at where are the highlights, like who's winning, who's doing it right, and how can we emulate that. And Nate, what are your thoughts?
So I'm going to play devil's advocate on this question just to be a little spicy for like the webinar and stuff like that. I would say like I approach this with like a certain degree of caution. So here in DC, I attended it was like a mini fellowship program with the author of AI Snake Oil. And so for anyone who doesn't know what that book is, it basically kind of illustrates like the landscape right now with all these startups that are popping up and claiming to use AI products in order to achieve like a certain business outcome. When in reality, most of them, like 95%, I think, are like GPT wrappers that don't really do anything. So the same can be said, I think, like for the sustainability space, where I've seen like this is a perfect time to shout out the AI and Environment Resource Hub, open access database with like, I think we have 500 plus startups that are logged at the intersection of different domains. I've seen like some companies that are, claiming to use AI to streamline ESG processes, but they don't exactly like do that, if you get what I mean. It's like more of a GPT wrapper to kind of buy into the AI hype and raise funding for seed rounds. So I think like what I'm seeing also is this evolution of like greenwashing, which is like, a pretty big problem still, into AI washing, which is like very interesting to note. There's a couple of papers that I can also recommend like on this like phenomena that's like evolving over time. But it's not all doom and gloom. I will say like some examples that I love personally. I can't pronounce it. Tracera. It's a platform that enables businesses to achieve sustainability goals with ESG. 51 to Carbon Zero from the UK, a net zero platform providing data-driven support for companies. And then finally, if you ever want to mess around with a climate simulator, En-ROADS from MIT Sloan Management School is an online climate simulator, which is like really cool. So just a couple of different examples, also incorporating the research aspect.
That's awesome. Thank you. I think I might have to try out that climate simulator. That sounds like fun. Sounds like SimCity on steroids. I know I was definitely someone playing with that back in the day. All right, we got some more questions in here, so we're gonna keep rolling along through them, see if we can get ourselves just about to the top of the hour. So again, appreciate all the time that everybody's given us here on the panel, and for those listening in, let's work our way through some more of these. All right. Oh, sorry, my screen just bounced around. Here we go. Okay, so this one I think is for you, Kate. How should we be pushing for sustainable AI use in our companies, and more broadly, when most companies are pushing their employees to use AI as much as possible?
Yeah, this is a great question. And we're also seeing a lot of companies, unfortunately, kind of backtracking away from some of their environmental commitments, or, as things have shifted politically. And similarly, yeah, we're seeing kind of a directive to use as much AI as possible before we actually understand how, what the best use cases are and are doing the right testing around it. But I think this is kind of where the governance comes in, the governance piece and the multi-stakeholder engagement, and kind of baking into all of our processes, thinking about this question. And I think just the more that AI can grow using in like a responsible way and in a sustainable way up front. And as we're kind of re-architecting the way that we're working, right? Like AI is upending everything from work to life to how we interact with each other to just everything within life and how we work. And so I think it's actually a good, it could be a good opportunity for us to just rethink how we approach that within business. I'm from Chicago, and we always talk about the Chicago fire being a good opportunity for us to build the city in a new way. And that's why Chicago architecture is so beautiful. And we have alleyways where we can put the trash instead of having it out on the streets like we do in New York. So it's almost like, this is going to change everything. And so how do we create these governance structures that enforce us or enable us to think about this upfront and how to approach this in more of a sustainable way that will prevent a situation where we need to make massive changes down the road once regulation comes around, or things become more costly, or we run into energy issues, things like that. So yeah, I think it could be an opportunity.
That's great. Yeah. So really getting that whole understanding on paper, getting that nuance into it instead of just use AI, run, and get something out the door. Yeah. I like that. All right. I think this one would be good for Nate. How does Gen AI usage compare to, say, a standard Google search? So in terms of like, I think we talked about like water usage for OpenAI. And is that further complicated with Google now integrating responses in their searches?
Yeah, so this is probably one of the most common questions that I get, like in all like the client calls that I do. Like folks are like really concerned about like, their water usage and energy usage for like a single ChatGPT like query or whatever query that you like dump into like an LLM. So there's a couple of points on this. So number one, I would say that the way with how reporting is done now from the big tech companies, it makes it extremely difficult to quantify like a single, like it's almost, it's not impossible to say this, but like it's extremely hard to say like, okay, like ChatGPT consumes exactly like X number of milliliters and consumes like X number of kilowatts per query. It's incredibly like difficult to like estimate that, and that's due to a combination of factors where, for example, like there's a really cool organization. I'm like a walking encyclopedia, I swear. There's a really cool organization called the Enabled Emissions Campaign, run by Will and Holly Alpine. These are former ex-Microsoft employees, and they frankly just got sick of Microsoft having like a lot of oil and gas contracts that they were using AI to boost the efficiency for those operations specifically. So they talk about, for example, how a lot of the reporting side of these big tech companies in their 2023, 24, and 25 reporting stats are not fully transparent. They cherry pick their environmental data to kind of show that they're like stewards of the environment, which is like interesting. And then I think the last point on that is that there's like room to grow like in these reports. So the metric is that like since 2022, all these like big tech companies have integrated AI into everything, which like vastly increases their carbon emissions, their energy usage, their water consumption. That's the general trend. And so the problem that a lot of my colleagues and I have is that that's just going to increase over time as AI continues to be integrated into everything that we do. So to kind of bring it back home, establishing like a single metric for energy or water is extremely difficult to do. So you'll see estimates based on like research consultants or consulting companies that'll like all have these different metrics. My point is this: rather than kind of obsessing over like what that single unit is, we should be zooming out and instead like trying to focus on good governance structures that prevent the misuse of water resources for example, cooling apparatuses in data centers to avoid massive consumptions in the first place. So rather than like focusing on like the single unit metric, we should instead be channeling our attention to the implementation of good governance structures, dragging public policymakers to the conversation at the state and the federal level to say, hey, we actually have a problem here. You're just choosing to ignore it. Sorry, I get like super pent out about this, but
Oh,
that's
I'm
just
glad you're
like
excited.
yeah, that's the response I would have. And then I would say like on the waterfront, there's a really cool water consumption calculator that I'll put in the chat from one of my colleagues, Mashika Allgood. She runs a small consulting company focused on tackling the water consumption issues for data centers. So I'll put that in the chat.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Thanks for the great resources and a good answer on that one. I think you're right that there is kind of a distraction that happens with this water analogy. It's helpful for people to kind of conceptualize what's going on, but then it kind of misdirects. At the end of the day, it's really about trying to find more efficient uses of what you're doing and being more deliberate about which technologies you use. And this is kind of like recycling as well, where, what you do at your home is important, and you should do the right thing there. But what you do in a business that scales ultimately has a much bigger impact in the environment. So some of your personal queries, maybe, it's good to think about it when you do them, but when you're going to put a process in place that will do things hundreds, thousands, or millions of times, let's really make sure we dig in there. And so I think that was echoed a lot by what everyone on the panel has been talking about today. And that calendar alarm is reminding me that we're at the top of the hour just about. So we did have some more questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to everything, but this hour was chock full with information. Huge thanks to our panelists. For providing a wealth of information. Maeve, Kate, Nate, this has been fantastic, super enjoyable to me. I hope everybody enjoyed today's content. Just a massive thanks for the questions, for the valuable insights. When you leave the webinar, you'll see a brief survey. Please take a moment to provide your honest feedback. This is really helpful for us in terms of improving the quality and content of our webinars. And we hope to see you all at our next webinar. So bye for now, but I'll see you soon. Thanks.
Thanks so much,
Bye bye.
See
everyone.
ya.
Bye, everybody. Take care.